The Burkina Faso people put their own money together, 80% community funded. They built processing plants to turn their tomatoes into product and keep the value chain inside their borders. They created thousands of jobs in the process. Meanwhile, here in America, Black investors and community members pulled nearly $12 million together in the name of economic empowerment and then watched a man in designer clothes spend it on himself. The same impulse, completely different outcomes. And I want to talk about why. My name is Jice Johnson. Welcome to my channel, and I'm a business strategist and economic developer. Here on this channel, I talk about business, leadership, and global politics. So if this is the type of content that you like, then I want you to like, subscribe, and share, and help me reach others who need to hear this information. All right, y'all. So I got a developing story happening right now. Okay. The Sahel Alliance, y'all, is standing on business, okay? So there are a lot of things that are shifting in West Africa. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss one of the most important economic stories that is happening on the continent right now. Right now, the Alliance of the Sahel states, that's Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, they have exited ECOWAS, right? So this has been ongoing for quite some time. Now, they have expelled French military forces. They've rejected the political and economic frameworks that have kept the Sahel dependent on Western powers for decades. And then rather than collapsing under the pressure, which is what everyone thought that they were going to do, they have been building. They are not talking about building, they are building. So I want to zoom in specifically on Burkina Faso because there is one example that is happening right now today that is a masterclass in economic sovereignty and what it looks like when a government is really serious about it. So let's talk about tomatoes of all things. Burkina Faso, right? Just stick with me, y'all. Stick with me. I promise you, stick with me. Burkina Faso is the fourth largest tomato producer in West Africa, the fourth largest. They have the land, they have the farmers. 80% of their population works in agriculture. But for years, they've been importing over 23,000 tons of processed tomato paste annually. So think about what that means. There are raw tomatoes that are leaving the country. And then there's a processed product that is coming back in. That means the labor, the manufacturing, and the profit are all happening somewhere else. Now, this is the colonial trade trap of all colonial trade traps dressed up as supply chain, and it is not unique to Burkina Faso. This pattern shows up everywhere where resources are extracted and where value is added outside of the community that is producing it. But in 2023, President Ibrahim Traore, my president Ibrahim Traore, obviously his government created what they called the agricultural offense. Okay. Now, they did not just launch this as a policy, y'all. They got to work. So in November of 2024, and you got to follow this timeline, all right? November of 2024, they inaugurated the Société Burkinabé des Tomates. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly in French or not, but if you speak French, please feel free to correct me. They created the SOBTO, and they did this in Bobo Dioulasso, which is like their second largest city, I believe. Now, they created state of the art processing plants capable of handling over 100 tons of fresh tomatoes in a day and producing tomato paste under the brand name Adia. Now, this was a nearly $12 million investment. And here's the part that I want you to digest, right? 80% of that was financed through popular shareholding. The Burkina Faso people put their savings into this. This was not a government handout. This was not foreign aid. This was a community that came together and said, we're going to fund our own future. And they opened up not just one, but a second plant in Yako. And that plant is projected to generate over 7,000 direct jobs, as well as 1,500 indirect jobs. Now they are working on a third facility that is in development. So now jump up from November of 2024 to March of today. And I just want to acknowledge we're talking about a year and a half-ish, right? A little over a year and a half. In March of this year, they made the move that sent ripples throughout the region, right? Burkina Faso officially suspended, not some, all 100% of their fresh tomato exports, every single one of them. They locked the entire raw material industry down on the inside of the country in order to feed their own processing infrastructure. And what they did was any attempted exports after their 2 week grace period were seized and then simply redistributed directly to the national plants, right? So they were not playing around. Now, what does that mean when they did this lockdown? Let's talk about what happened over in their neighboring country, Ghana, because I think this is where the lesson gets really real. Ghana spends close to $100 million a year on tomato imports from Burkina Faso. $100 million a year on tomatoes. Okay. So we understand this is a big industry for them. Now, a crop that grows in African soil, okay, it is a staple that feeds Ghanaian families every single day. When Burkina Faso suspended these exports, right, and this just happened last month, then Ghanaian officials called it a national security risk and a food security crisis. And the markets in their northern region, which border Burkina Faso, felt it immediately, right? So their prices started rising, their traders started scrambling. And then the Ghanaian officials said that with proper support, okay, Ghana could be self-sufficient in tomato production within 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years. The land has been there, the farmers have been there, the capacity has been there. What is not there is the vision and the investment, right? The investment hasn't been there. And so when their neighbor decided to stop exporting their raw materials because they decided to build for themselves, then Ghana felt the full weight of that dependency overnight. And that's the cost of outsourcing their food system, right? But I think, the harder question is not just, what's the cost of outsourcing? The harder question is, what are we building? And I think that there are some really key parallels that we could make in America to when the government says that they don't care about equitable hiring or contracting. I think that there are parallels that we could make when you have corporate America who's decided that our labor, right, is not valuable to them. Overnight, we feel the weight of dependency. And the question we should be asking ourselves is, what are we building? What are we building? So, um, I want to make a quick stop here because let me back up. Don't think that I walked away from my intro, right? Because I feel like we need to talk about this pattern more. And I started talking about this just because I have been seeing it in the media and it's getting under my skin. But there is a contrast that we simply cannot ignore. The Burkina Faso people believed in a vision and then they funded it, right? 80% of that was community capital, to be clear. The Burkina Faso government only funded 20% of not one, not two, now a third plant that they are building, right? So brick by brick, plant by plant for the collective over the course of some years, the Burkina Faso people have been building something. And when I think about what has happened here in America, where you had over 15,000 Black Americans who believed in a vision that pulled nearly $12 million together into the Tulsa Real Estate Fund, a fund that was named after Black Wall Street, a fund that was sold on the promise of rebuilding Black economic power through real estate, and to have seen the fund's founder, Jay Morrison, raise that money in the name of the community, right? Got me too. I have money invested in the Tulsa Real Estate Fund. And, and then used it to line his own pockets to pay himself management fees that exceeded what the fund was even generating is absolutely atrocious. To use investor money on personal expenses, the fund collapsed into bankruptcy, right? 15,000 people lost their investment, essentially gone. And to understand that the same energy, right, as the Burkina Faso people, right, the same willingness to invest in a collective vision, right, but have these completely different outcomes is really about the leadership on the other end of that trust, right? And it's atrocious that Jay Morrison is still outside asking people for money, but that's a whole nother situation. What this is what grifted leadership costs us, right? And we're not talking about it enough because it's not just that it costs us the money, it costs us the trust, the belief that we can actually do this together. And that is a real tax that we don't address enough, right? And so I've written a full piece on recognizing grifters in leadership. I will put that link to my Substack article in the description below, because I do believe that the ability to spot the difference between a builder and a grifter is a survival skill that we need right now. That being said, I want to bring it on back to the continent, right? Because this is where I want us to keep our eyes. This contrast shows up in a lot of ways. And so it shows up at the national level as well, right? So now, as I said, this story is unfolding, right? Today I'm recording this, it is midnight on April the 3rd. But what just happened on March the 25th, right? So about a week ago, a little over a week ago, Ghana led a historic push at the United Nations at their General Assembly to recognize the transatlantic slave trade as one of the gravest crimes against humanity. And I'm not taking anything away from that, right? Symbolically, that was a moment that mattered. The diaspora celebrated it, unless you were being weird FBA on some type of whatever, but I digress. The continent celebrated. And what was interesting was on that same day, kind of a bait and switch type of situation, because on that same day, the Ghanaian administration signed a new security defense partnership with the European Union or the EU. President Mahama announced that there was also the acquisition of French military helicopters, and this was all facilitated through French President Macron, supposedly to strengthen Ghana's military air capacity. And, I'm not here to say what it was really about. Let me keep going. Ghana's armed forces, right, are already training with French troops inside of Ghanaian forests. Now, yeah, France. I really let's just hone in there. France. This is the same power that Burkina Faso and the rest of the Sahel alliance, this is the power that they expelled. This is the same external forces that the Sahel alliance has formally and decisively rejected. So, so how do we reckon with that, right? How do we reckon with this outward symbolism and the structural actions, right? What does it mean to stand on the international stage and call for recognition of colonial atrocities while simultaneously deepening military intelligence and security cooperation with colonial powers? Not just any colonial powers, the same colonial powers of that specific region, one that your own neighbors have drawn a very clear line against. And so I'm not here to just say that it's hypocrisy outright, because I do think that context matters. I do think that security threats are real. I do think that Ghana shares a border with Burkina Faso, and that the spillover from the regional instability is a legitimate concern. Also, who's causing the regional instability is very telling about where that concern may lie. But the lens that I want to use, right, is that are the actions addressing the root, right? Or are they managing the surface while leaving the structure intact? And symbolic leadership has a habit of saying the right things on the right stages, where structural leadership is what builds processing plants, right? And structural leadership is what redirects $100 million, of food imports back into domestic agriculture. Structural leadership asks, what are we creating? What are we owning? Where is the value staying? And those are very different kinds of leaderships. And so, I think that we need to be able to determine and distinguish the difference. So, so here's what I want to leave you with. The continent is building, right? And it's not asking for permission. To be clear, the entire Sahel region has been under an immense amount of geopolitical pressure, and they are standing 10 toes down on business. They are not asking for permission to build. They're not waiting for the right geopolitical moments. They are not waiting for foreign investment to validate their vision. Burkina Faso is a country that is facing active security threats, international sanctions, and a legacy of economic extraction. And in the midst of all of that, they have built two going into their third processing plant. And that's not all that they've built. That's just the focus of this particular video because this particular situation is unfolding. These things are community funded. They have created what they need from the inside out. And that is a principle that I keep coming back to when I'm talking about economic empowerment. Because whether we're talking about West Africa or Black communities here in America, or any other people who have historically had their wealth extracted, right, before it could compound, we need to know that we can create what we need. But it requires deciding that that our resources, your resources, are going to serve your community first. This is why I get frustrated when we talk about not being able to support things as simple as boycotts out of convenience. But this video is not about convenience. So I'm going to save that conversation for another day before I go down a whole nother rabbit hole, right? But this is when we have to trust ourselves that we can build. This is when we need to know that the leaders that we are getting behind, right, have the vision, the right type of vision, the right type of leadership to match the vision, to move away from what's symbolic and move very clearly and decisively into what's structural. That raw materials are not leaving without coming back as a product, right? That we can trust who we get behind and that our leadership honors the vision and commitment and doesn't just extract and consume from us. The opportunities that are happening right now on the continent are very real. There are industries that are being built from the ground up. There are supply chains that are being restructured, and quite frankly, there are new markets that are opening. And so we should continue to remember. I'm going to continue to drive home the point that the global South is shifting. And that the question is whether we're going to be positioned as a part of what's being built or whether we're going to be watching from the outside. And and I'll close with this. This is what we're going to be talking about this year at the Go Global Conference. The Go Global Conference is September 30th through October 3rd. It will be held in Atlanta. I will be there. The link is going to be in my description below, so check that out. If you're serious about understanding how to position yourself in this moment, then this is where you need to be. So if this video made you think, please share it, put it out in front of someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to go deeper on the grifting piece, or if you want to talk about performative leadership frameworks, or if you want to talk about structural economic empowerment, what that actually looks like, I have all of that over there in articles on my Substack, and the link is below. So I am Jice Johnson, y'all, and I will see you in the next one.